Hey everybody, this is Bruce and I've got the dog on the floor and I can't believe it, but today we're going to work on the last video for the LiveView series. And specifically, we're going to work on Schemaless Changesets, and I'm going to release this one for free. So here's what's happening. In the book, Designing Elixir Systems with OTP, James Gray and I came up with this mental mnemonic to think about the layers of the application. Do fun things with big, loud worker bees. And you have the core pieces on the bottom, and you have the boundary pieces on the top with boundaries, life cycles, workers. And the boundary piece is the piece that we're going to be talking about today. And this is the way it's implemented within Phoenix. So normally it works quite well. You take some data and you collect it in perhaps something like a form. And based on those parameters, you look up a schema, you feed the rest of it into a changeset, and then you create a database record by inserting that changeset into a repo. But that makes a couple of assumptions. We assume that there's a particular timing that would go from a changeset and feed it immediately into a validate or into a repo. We assume that there's a repo at all. Sometimes we don't need one at all, or even that there's a schema. And so that all of these assumptions tend to place this data structure in the boundary side within the context. I want to place this structure sometimes in the view side with a schemaless changeset. So I basically just chop everything off from the bottom. I remove the schema and from the repo. So I am actually going to cut this up. I'm going to chop out the schema and chop out the repo, and we're going to actually place the changeset code in something called FormData with a schemaless changeset. And this is actually the work that we're doing in a master key project, but I thought I'd extract the idea because it's important for the greater Elixir community and release this video for free. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and while this Phoenix generator is running, let's talk about our game plan. So mix phoenix.new, the happiest words in the English language. Okay, let's just call this schemaless, and this is a live view. And so we'll let that rip. So essentially what we have is a separation of concerns issue. It's asking for dependencies. I'll say yes. Yep, we'll let those fly. And so we have a separation of concerns issue where Ecto has included the concern of validation, which most of the time makes sense. But in this case, we want to kind of swing that validation over to the view side, because all we're really talking about is the idea of presenting a form and validating the data inside. We're not talking about storing it or doing anything else with it. And this is something that we often want to do when we're building a layered design. What we want to do is go from an area of uncertainty to an area of certainty. That's the interface between the boundary and the core. So that's what we're going to do with our schemaless form data. Okay, so as you can see, I've done my mixecto create. I've changed to the directory and run the server, and we're hitting it up on localhost 4000. Let's go ahead and edit the files. So we're going to open this project, and we're going to go ahead and add a route. And let's see. Let's create we're going to go into Schemaless Web, and we're going to create a route. Let's create a route called game, because this is essentially the project that we're working on in Groxio. This is a game called Master Key. So let's just say if the user is on game, and then game live, and we'll go ahead and just drop the live action. It's an optional argument anyway. And let's go ahead and create a live view, and we'll use this as a template. We'll just grab this much, and then we'll create a game live. Drop that much in, and this is a game live. And we're going to, let's drop that just so that there will be less code. Def render This is going to take into science. Remember, the socket is essentially the data for LiveView, and socket.assigns is where we put all our custom stuff. And I'm going to have a sigil, which remember is just syntactic sugar for an inconvenient form to express concisely. And so I'm going to say the traditional message. That's great, just like that. Okay, so we're going to let this rip. We're going to go to game. Okay, and we've got the hello world there. So what we're going to do is essentially take a guess on this over and over. And all I'm going to implement on this page is a guess with a validation where I drop an initial change set into my socket. And then when I submit, I want the state of the form actually submitted to my socket. So let's go ahead and mark those areas out. So change set is just something, we don't know what yet, and the form data is going to be a guess, something of this form like that. So, and then we're going to say we're going to render a form that looks something like this. That's going to be a form. And this is going to have some custom validation in it. So that's the shape of that code. And I could go ahead and drop something into channels, into the, not channels. I could drop something into a context. I could create a context with Phoenix or something, but that's overkill. All I really want to do is have some type of scrubbing for the data that I put into my socket. So I want to validate this data from this change information, right? So as the user is typing it, they'll validate from here and we'll submit the data to here, and then we'll be off to the races. We'll be able to do what we want within the flow of the application. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop in a file called FormData. And this FormData is essentially going to be scoped exactly like the game here. And maybe I could call this, if I have multiple forms, I could call this like, I don't know, the game form data or something like that. But just form data is going to be fine for the purposes of this illustration. And what I'm going to do is, rather than specify the type information and the field information in the schema itself, I'm going to specify that data directly in this module. And then I'm also going to apply the Phoenix change sets. So let's take a look at some of the things that we're doing. So I'm going to say IEX mix and see if this is building. It should build okay. And I'm just going to say ecto. And there's a there's a class right here, ecto change set, that we want to import. And essentially what this is in ecto is a change policy. This enables us to make sure that we're accepting only the forms that the user, or only the fields that the user presented, that we're casting them to the appropriate types, and that we're validating them according to the needs of the application. But we don't want to tie this to a database schema. We want this to sit by itself. But there's a way to use this. And so let's take a look at Schemaless Changesets. Okay, so ecto change set is right here. So if you look all the way over here, there's this thing called a schemaless change set. And this has a pretty decent template that we're going to use. So what's happening here is we've defined a struct, and we're going to use a map. That's going to work fine. Structs give us a little bit of sugar that we wouldn't normally have, but we can work around that within our form definition. It has a set of types, and then it has the change set. And this is the thing that we're looking to create, the change set. So let's go ahead and take this general form and see what we can do with it. So def and we're going to say validate. So we can take a validation, and this is going to take params. And let's go ahead and drop this in as a template and pick off the pieces one by one. We're going to use a map instead of a struct. Though we could, I guess we could use a struct here with a def struct. So one of the approaches that I could use, I could say def struct like that, and then I could use the, and then the Changeset could use that structure, and then I wouldn't have to do an as. The Phoenix could infer the name of the form data, but I think that we'll just use the as instead, and we'll just work with a naked map. And this we're going to need. This is the types, but we're going to express the types with types like that. And so this is a module attribute. All this is a value that we can substitute, that we can specify at compile time. And any code before we change this can take advantage of the data. And we're just going to have a guess that's a string, and that's it. So we're going to validate the params like this. And so it's going to start with the structure that we're working with right here, and the types, which is params, or types, sorry. Like that, and then we're going to work through all these. But I'm going to go ahead and alias this much. Right, so we could just use, we could pipe this much to our Changeset dot cast, and then this is going to ask us to validate the params, but it's going to need the types, which I can specify just like that. And I'm going to say map.keys for the types. Right, so all this is going to return is just guess, but I'm going to go ahead and leave the code structure like this so that in case I change my types, I'm also okay as the change set grows. And then I could have just a couple of fields in here. Like one of these is validate required. And let's do like a validate required of guess, and then I could also have some custom validations in here, and I'll let you go ahead and read the documentation for the custom validations, or maybe we should do a validate length. Okay, so what does that validate length look like? Validate length. So let's see what that looks like. Validate length is going to take the change set, the field, and the options. And so the options are min and max, like that. And so that's what we'll do in here. Validate required. So this is validate length. And this is going to take a change set, the field, and then a min of 4 and a max of 4. So this has to be a length of 1, and we could write a custom validator if we wanted to. And one of the things that Phoenix is going to require, it's going to require an action of validate. And this is basically this basically tells Phoenix that we want the validation to be used in our form to validate our form. So let's go ahead and try this before we plug it into our form, and then we'll be off to the races. So did we do an smix? Yes. So I could just do a recompile here, and I didn't pick up my file. There's game live, so that's there. Let's do it from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to say schemaless.web.formData. And then the function that we have is validate, and I can pass params. Guess is 1, 2, 3, 4. and that's valid. But if I did 1, 2, 3 like that, that's valid false, right? Because it should be at least count characters. So that's great. So that means that we have a pretty decent working validator that we're going to be able to use with the Phoenix forms, and we'll plug that in next. Believe it or not, we're almost done. All right, so here we are. We have the render, and I don't want to talk a lot about Phoenix forms, so I'm just going to paste in the one from our earlier example. But I want to point out a couple of things. Let's call this as game. So this option is basically required because we don't have a structure or a schema behind it to tell Phoenix what to name this thing. So when we actually implement our handlers, they're going to come in as game. And there's a single field, it's guess. And we're going to validate this thing with an error tag. And the way that we can do that is that Phoenix uses Ecto, and Ecto has this policy for change that we've been working at, which is called a changeset. And so all a changeset are basically the rules that we need to govern each type of change. So for example, creating a new password, creating a new admin account, creating a new standard account. All of these things might have different fields and different validations that govern them. And so that's what a change set does. And what I've already done is wire them into a couple of Phoenix LiveView hooks, one for Phoenix change and one for Phoenix submit. And these are going to trigger events. So this is going to be handle. And this is going to be, basically the form is the message, metadata, in the socket like that. And so I'm going to have a couple of these. And for this one, the message is going to be validate. And for this one, the message is going to be save. And the metadata in both cases is going to take, it's going to take this game, and then that's going to pass us, well, let's call this a form, because it really is a form. And then essentially they're both going to return something of the same shape. Since this is a gen server cast, this will be a no reply tuple, and this is going to return a socket. So basically what we're going to do is call a reducer. So function on the socket, and I'm going to pass the form in, and that ought to return just another socket back. So I'd like to build my code with reducers. So this will be a validate, and this will be a save, because essentially that allows me to shape things in a way that I could take advantage of data multiple times. So I'm going to go ahead and build my change set here. So let's say build change set. So I'm going to take the socket and I'm going to pass it just empty params here. And the form data is just a guess like that. Okay. And so my build change set also needs to be a reducer. And so all this is going to do is help to validate me. So I can take this and I can say, I could say this is a socket, this is a form, that's really the data. Yeah, let's just call it the form. And so I'm going to say assign socket, and I'm going to say the change set is going to be this validation function that's sitting here in the form. So this is just form data dot validate right there. And we're going to call the validate function like that. .validate, and that's going to take the form. Great. So I think that that does what we want it to. So maybe open this up a little bit, let it breathe. All right, and so what's pretty about this code is now I have a reducer. Since I've basically shaped it the right way, this same code can be called from here and also from the validate. Actually, this is exactly the same function, isn't it? So, you know what? I want to call this validate. And then we also have a save. Yep, that looks good to me. I'm not going to allow this to be saved if it's valid. This data should be okay. In a production setting, I might have a stronger check here. I might actually take the save through the Changeset and pull the data out of the Changeset and apply it that way. But you know what? For this, I think that we're going to be fine. Let's just go ahead and take the data and put it in the form. So I'm going to say assign socket form data, and I'm going to put the form in there. And I think that that's going to be fine to illustrate for the purposes of our application. Yeah, so let's go ahead and add a little bit of information here just to see what's in, just to get a good view of what's in the Changeset. So I'm just going to have the preview, which is a great option for code. And I'm going to say inspect the Changeset here. And then I'm going to say, actually, this should be inspect Changeset, shouldn't it? Did you see me slip into Ruby right there? I haven't coded Ruby for years. And then I also want to present the guess, which would be, or the form data. Form underscore data. Is that how I did it? Yeah, the form data is right in the mount. Changeset. No, this is wrong, isn't it? That's just a validate. Yeah, so the form data is assigned right here. Yeah, and this is wrong. So this needs to be, yeah, I messed that up pretty well, didn't I? Okay, and then assign socket the form data like that, and I pipe that to, yeah, there we go. And then validate the form just to kind of kick us off with the Changeset. All right, and so so that looks good to me. And here we have the Changeset of the validation form. So that's the validate, and then I'm going to have a save for this one, and that's going to take a socket. You know, we could play the same game here. I could just start that with a socket. And the save of the form. Let's just call this a form, right? And then we could say assign socket like that. Okay. And then for this form, let's say, I'm just going to initialize that to blank, and then so I can save it and I can validate it, and we're off to the races. Okay, so there's no way this is going to compile the first time, but let's take a look anyway. So we're going to take a look at this. Okay, so no file 41 missing token. Okay, so that's in the template in the game live. Yeah, we never finished that off, did we? Okay. Yeah, okay, so okay, so we're getting a crash here. That's good. That means that we're getting closer. So we know that the LiveView is trying to fire. So what's it giving me? It says no, so handle event 3. What's coming in? So this is validate. And then we get the token, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there is a game with a guess. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. So this is validate here, and the Phoenix change is validate. So what's happening here? Validate right there. Oh, I see. Yeah, so this is a I make this mistake like once a day. Say, yeah, let's go ahead and hit both of these at the same time. But essentially, this is coming in as a string. All right, let's see if that looks better to us. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's getting created. You can see that I have a chain set here, and you can see that I don't have any submitted data here. And then when I fire the submit, we got another crash here. So no function clause and handle event 3. So this is handle event guess. Okay, so that is left over from this. We have Phoenix change and submit as guess. So let's call this save instead, and this is going to work. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I can submit, and look, we get a 1, 2, 3, 4. And one of the cool things about this is you notice that if we delete some of those characters, then this button is disabled. And the way that we do that, all we do is we have a disabled, and that's either true or false. And so it's true if the chain set is not valid. So it's that easy to only fire this when I have a valid chain set. What we've done is we've taken the concerns of validation and we've moved them where they're far away from our form in the typical context, and we've moved them, we've co-located them, we've put them closer to where the form is actually created. So we have this the form created here, and I don't have to go far at all to see the change policy that is only significant in this case to the user interface. And that's an excellent thing. If you like this content and you haven't yet subscribed, I encourage you to subscribe to Groxio. You're going to learn a lot about Elixir, and along the way you're going to learn about some other languages too. At Groxio, we believe the most important thing that you can do for your career is actually learn to learn. And that's our focus. That's an excellent thing. This is Bruce and the dog on the floor for Groxio Learning.